to this online session, picking up the unit on American drama, which is called Introduction to American Drama. In this class, we will look at how the political events that were taking place from 14th century America right up to the 19th century and to the 20th century influenced the unfolding of and the development of American drama as a genre. The people who were immigrating into America, as we saw in the last class, were those who were fleeing persecution, those who had a separate identity, a separate idea as to what religion is supposed to be. And in this case, when I refer to the word religion, it is primarily Christianity, as most of the immigrants coming into America in the 16th and 17th century were from the European continent. Most of them were Christians, and for those who were escaping from Europe were primarily Protestants. The Protestant ethic was one which believed in hard work, which believed in individual effort, something which believed in austerity and not engaging in idle work, not engaging in idle gossip. And that somehow thwarted the progress of drama in the initial stages, because drama or any form of literary entertainment was looked down upon by the Puritans. They thought drama was a waste of time. They thought drama was something that was indulged by people who were idle and who had no important work to carry. For the Puritans, work was a separate form or a different form of worship, and therefore anything that they set their mind to was supposed to bring them closer to God, and drama was not something that they considered as that which was equivalent to worship. The American drama, if we have to give a gist of it, was nothing but a culmination of the national, the cultural, and the artistic phenomena that were taking place roughly over 3 or 4 centuries. As we saw, the American War of Independence, which began in the later half of the 18th century, birthed the nation that we today know as the United States of America. But that was not a momentous occasion. It was a culmination of centuries of decades of oppression from the British Parliament. The idea of separate nationhood and identity, which was separate and severed from its European ancestors, was something which was gradual. It was a combination of being separated from your motherland for centuries and the tyrannical policies of the British Parliament, which continued in America for a very long time. The sectarian strife between various immigrant communities continued as the process of forging a new nation continued within America. The Protestants who came in from Britain were not on good terms with the Catholics who came in from Ireland. There was mutual hatred between the two communities. It was a combination of being separated from your motherland for centuries and the tyrannical policies of the British Parliament, which continued in America for a very long time. The sectarian strife between various immigrant communities continued as the process of forging a new nation continued within America. The Protestants who came in from Britain were not on good terms with the Catholics who came in from Ireland. There was mutual hatred between the two communities. The same could be said of the immigrants coming in from France or Germany. Gradually, after the 18th century, there were immigrants coming in from other parts of the world which were not European, and therefore America came to be known as the melting pot of the world, where all nationalities from across the world came into America, settled there, maintained their cultural identity while simultaneously being referred to as Americans. With independence and with a separate idea of being a nation came the idea of propagandist literature, because it became important for Americans to justify the idea of a separate nationhood, to justify their actions of severing their ties with Britain. And therefore, propagandist literature gained momentum during the War of Independence and after it. One honorable exception in this propagandist literature was Robert Munford's The Patriot. It was an exception in the sense that it managed to critically examine both sides of the aisle. In the sense, it did not wholesale agree to the tyrannical regime of the British Parliament, while at the same time it invoked a healthy dose of suspicion towards those who called themselves American patriots. In the play, the two characters or the two protagonists called Meanwell and Truman, which is a pun in itself, were ones who were patriots. Nevertheless, they were not the overzealous, violent revolutionaries that wanted to get rid of the British by hook or crook. While the revolutionaries were portrayed in poor light in the play The Patriot. Robert Munford, although tried his best to be balanced in his criticism of both the sides, he invariably exposes his own aristocratic side, as the characters that he portrays in a positive light are those which are sympathetic and come from an aristocratic background, while the revolutionaries invariably come from a working class background. This is why, despite the positives of Robert Munford's play, the play still stacks or smacks of aristocratic tendencies. Nevertheless, despite the criticism, despite the propagandist literature that was being published, a nation that was born was not out of peaceful protest, but America was a nation that was not evolving gradually, but it was birthed by a bloody war, a bloody revolution, which today we know as the American War of Independence. This is why, despite the positives of Robert Munford's play, the play still stacks or smacks of aristocratic tendencies. Nevertheless, despite the criticism, despite the propagandist literature that was being published, a nation that was born was not out of peaceful protest, but America was a nation that was not evolving gradually, but it was birthed by a bloody war, a bloody revolution, which today we know as the American War of Independence. The creation of American literature post-independence was almost similar to the creation of universe out of nothing. For those of you who have a rudimentary understanding of physics, the Big Bang Theory, as we are told, created the universe out of nothing. As absurd as this idea might sound, scientists all over the world believe that this is the truth. The creation of literature in a new country, or at least in a country which has been established after a bloody revolution, is a similar exercise. It is akin to creating a literary universe out of nothing. Now, the statement is not exactly true. It is not as if those who created literature in America post its independence were working in a position of vacuum. They had the influences of Elizabethan drama, which was the phase in which Shakespeare, Marlowe, and Ben Jonson worked in England under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. Nevertheless, the attempt was not to be swept off the feet by the influences of the Elizabethan period. There was a constant pursuit to seek cultural independence from its European ancestors. At the same time, it also wanted to escape the tag of a bastardized art. A bastardized art meaning being the illegitimate offspring or the illegitimate product of its forefathers. That is how the British sneeringly looked at American history, at American literature, as they thought it was nothing but a poor imitation of the original, the much more competent British literature. This journey is to a certain degree similar to that of a post-colonial state like India. Post-independence, post-1947, the Indian film industry, the Indian art world also went through a similar crisis. There was a constant desire to connect with our past, while at the same time, the desire to shake off our colonial identity made many progressive writers influence different forums. And films like Naya Daur were examples of this attempt to explore what it means to be a newly independent post-colonial state. As far as American literature is concerned, Robert Taylor's The Contrast is a perfect example of this particular phenomenon. The former set of characters are those who blindly imitate the West, or in their case, who blindly imitate their European counterparts, while the others are far more genuine. They are sons of the soil. They are those who are proud patriots and refuse to borrow the aristocratic vices of their European ancestors. But gradually, as the din of nationalism, as this din of newfound patriotism gradually died down, there was a desire to look for a much more nuanced, a much more subtle idea of what it means to be a nation, what it means to be a patriot. And therefore, this journey was the beginning point of moving from nationalism to a much more nuanced understanding of nationalism. The high-pitched nationalistic tone gradually gave way to somewhat complex portrayals of the political tussle that continued between England and America. William Dunlop's Andre critiqued the unending antagonism towards England. In this play, which is named after the protagonist called Major Andre, was the one who was hanged for being a spy on the accusation of being a spy of the British. It delved into the psyche of having roots with England, having certain bonds with England, while at the same time not surrendering to wholesale antagonism towards the British. There had to be a golden mean between not being subservient to the British, while at the same time not being unnecessarily critical as well. There was a desire to form a new identity, but to take the best of what European continent had to offer. Without wholesale accepting the vices of the European social hierarchy, the political institutions of the European continent were borrowed, modified, and adapted. James Nelson Baker's Marmion is an example of this tendency. The play Superstition by Baker is an interesting one. In times when it was almost impossible across Europe to critique religion, Superstition was a play which took on the Puritans, took on their irrational beliefs, took on the manner in which they went witch hunting, in the manner in which they massacred hundreds of people on the accusation of witchcraft. It called for a much more rationalistic understanding of natural life and a desire to develop a scientific temperament among the newly developed colonies. Gradually, there was a fatigue, a frustration that developed with the overtly political and nationalistic tone that literature that was being produced constantly espoused. And therefore, it created invariably a space for responding to the romantic aesthetic tendencies that are prevalent everywhere. There was a preponderance of trans-American plots, examples being The Fall of Tarquin and The Gladiator. These, instead of looking at the present, instead of looking at the political, went back into the antiquity. It looked into the antiquated past, a collective past of both the Europeans and the Americans as well. After the political literature and experiments in romantic aestheticism, finally, a genuinely indigenous character called the stage Yankee developed. The stage Yankee was a stereotype. It was a stereotype, nevertheless a positive one. The emergence of the stage Yankee was a stereotype which Americans were proud of, and a stereotype which was portrayed to be the exact antithesis of the British or European aristocrat. The stage Yankee was nevertheless a male, and it was a ruralized comic figure. The stage Yankee initially was used as a comic relief and gradually ended up becoming far more important. It was invariably connected with the westward expansion of the American continent. It was connected with the idea of the Yankee going on into unsupervised territories and winning over as much land as possible. The romantic lens gradually moved from the political to the domestic. There was a narrowing of focus. Instead of looking at the larger political narratives or the larger romantic themes that literature has always dealt with, the frame of reference narrowed down to the domestic affairs of common Americans. The depiction of westward expansion also formed a part in this particular stage of American drama and American literature. In a parallel world in America, a greater tragedy of slavery unfolded, leading to a civil war. As we saw in the last class, as the westward expansion continued, as the frames of references of the American literature widened and narrowed, there was a vast tragedy that was unfolding. Many Africans, roughly 3 million Africans over the years, were enslaved and were made to work at the plantations. So the American prosperity that we know of today came at the expense of the depredations of those that were bought as slaves from Africa. The civil war that was fought between the North and South over the issues of slavery and federalism, that is, the demand of the states to have more rights than that of the central government, the North American states coming out victorious and their ideology trumping over the South. And that led to another vista opening in American literature, known as melodrama. So from the real, this was a movement to the fantastical. There was a focus on holding the attention of the audience. There was a focus on the plays being entertaining rather than educative. And the subject matter shifted from the nation to the issues faced by the individual. The Civil War opened fault lines between the northern parts and the southern parts, which were reflected in these plays as well. The societal division between the aristocratic rich and the poor, the north versus the south, all of these found reflection in melodramatic plays. The USP or the X factor of the plays was the plot in these plays were carefully designed to resolve the conflicts in the gentlest possible manner. Social hierarchies were not necessarily questioned. The point of the plot was not necessarily to question how things exist, question how society performs, but to form the gentlest possible resolution in the most humorous possible way. Melodrama invariably led to the emergence of the heroine as a trope due to the romantic compunctions of the plot. Laura Cortland, a famous actress or the famous character from a play called Under the Gaslights, is a perfect example of this particular trend. The organic development of American drama from a political theatre, a propagandist literature, a melodramatic form of theatre to actorly tradition was natural. From being focused on the plot, from being focused on holding the attention of the audience, since American drama had now been established for a few decades, almost a century, there was a gradual aura that developed around those who were popular actors. Most of them, ironically, were British actors, Edwin Forrest and Edwin Booth being two most important names. There was a cult that developed around the actors, which in some sense shadowed the playwright, shadowed the stage, and also overshadowed the plot itself. The actors became the nucleus, they became the center, they became the world around which the paraphernalia of the stage revolved. The playwrights, the agents, the audience, all of these were attracted to those actors who would draw in the audience. Not very different from the film industry that we know today, as it is primarily geared towards actors who can draw in an audience in order for the producers to rake in the money and earn a profit. Since the cult of the individual or the cult of the actor gradually ended up gaining a halo of its own, gaining an aura of its own, themes of the frontier hero or rugged individualism gained huge importance. The frontier hero, the frontier, someone who is at the front, someone who is at the horizons, someone who's fighting a battle at the frontier in order to expand his horizon. The frontier hero was invariably a male. The rugged individualism that was associated with the frontier hero was overtly masculine. And it is no surprise, as it was only masculine tendencies that were required to be able to survive in an environment as hostile as that of the 17th or 18th or even the 19th century America that we know of. From the frontier hero, from the cult of the actor, from this actorly tradition, and from this idea of the frontier hero or the rugged individual, which persists in many Hollywood films to this day, the savior, the single individual figure that comes or acts as a savior, which is hyper masculine, and something, a model which is very difficult to emulate, was gradually given away, was gradually fading away, and the actor slightly receded into the background. The actor receded into the background, and that led to the rise of the stage manager. Stage managers were generally the ones who produced the play, while at the same time they also directed. There were many examples of people who both directed and produced the play as well. They were the ones who held the reins of the financial aspects and the creative aspects of the play as well. The downfall of the actor meant that other aspects of a stage play had to gain importance, and the need for a realistic portrayal of the life that Americans saw around them required the staging and the costuming to be realistic as well. Therefore, gradually from the actor, the focus shifted to the stage and to the costumes. Now, the word realism here is important. Realism does not necessarily mean that which is based on true historical facts. Realism is something which is not fantastical, not magical, not beyond the realm of reality. It deals with issues that Americans dealt with on a daily basis. It also deals with societal, political issues as well. The technical advancements that were a product of modern science and industrial revolution, because at this stage we are discussing a period of the second half of the 19th century. So modern science and industrial revolution had arrived, and that made it possible for technical advancements on the stage. To have a mechanized stage where sophisticated equipment could be used in order to enhance the experience of the viewers. Something which could be compared with the 3D or the 4D technology that we enjoy today. A much more mundane, a prototype of similar forms was used in Velasco's Gaza. Unfortunately, as it happens with every form of art which becomes very popular, the financial or the business interests managed to overshadow the artistic or the creative license of the artists. That is a prominent feature across film industries over the world, and American drama in the 19th century was no exception to this. The desire to earn profit became supreme for the stage managers, became supreme from business interests, and therefore the intricacies of the plot, the finesse of the artists, and the technical advancements of the stage gradually led on to become, and all these factors, the acting intricacies, the creative intricacies of the playwright, the acting prowess of the actors ended up becoming secondary, and what became more important was to hold the attention of the audience and ensure that they continue watching the play by hook or by crook, which in local parlance is known as playing to the gallery, playing to the lowest common denominator and not necessarily challenging the perception of the audience. A mainstream Hindi film or a mainstream Hollywood film is a perfect equivalent, is a perfect example of the kind of dramas, the kind of plays that were being written in this particular stage of American history. And finally, we reach to the fag end, to the conclusive part of our class. This was an essence of realistic drama. From focusing on staging and costuming, now the focus gradually shifted to portraying stories, to portraying themes and issues which were realistic. The role of the playwright, the role of the artist also was seen in a different lens. The modern playwright came to be seen as a conscience keeper of his or her time. The modern playwright was someone who was supposed to speak truth to power. The modern playwright was expected to challenge the perception of the audience and challenge the social structures that we consider to be the norm and the convention of our times. James Ahearn's Margaret Fleming is a perfect example of this particular way of thinking. Margaret Fleming was inspired by Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House. The question of marriage, which was considered a sacred institution by Christianity and something which was God-given, therefore divorce was also not allowed for a very, very long time under the Christian church. The institution of marriage was put under the critique or the critical eye of the playwright. This phase of American drama was also a marriage of realism and realistic art. Realistic art being the staging, the costuming, the dialogues, and realism being the plot, the story, and the manner in which the story was being told. Now, some of the features of realistic drama were characters that were something that we could relate to, characters that we could relate with, characters which seemed relatable, characters which seemed normal, characters which and characters like these which were put in emotionally charged situations. Such characters were always dealt with plain direct dialogue, the lofty language of Shakespearean theatre, the lofty language of Restoration drama, the use of free verse was done away with. The use of heroic couplet was done away with, and instead, what was used was plain direct dialogue. The acting was also not melodramatic, it was understated. It was not The acting was also not made done in a manner in which every point of it was emphasized for the audience to understand. It was understated, it was much more nuanced and slightly more complex. Stereotypes were done away with, and instead, there was a gradual, subtle, complex portrayal of different characters. The characters had depth, the characters had shades, and the characters were not used as stock characters or stock representatives of different social phenomena, as we discussed about the stage Yankee or a married woman or the European aristocratic gentleman. The characters had a different shades and they developed and changed over a period of the play. And finally, the most important aspect of the realistic drama that began in the late part of the 19th century and continued across the 20th century was that of questioning social hierarchies, of questioning the manner in which we saw reality as it existed, of questioning and interrogating the institutions that we saw all around us, whether it is the state, whether it is race relations between the African Americans and the rest of the country, as well as institutions such as marriage, economy, the whole idea of consumerism, so on and so forth. The two plays that we will be dealing with in our syllabus, Ionesco's Hairy Ape and Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, fall under the category of realistic drama. Ionesco's Hairy Ape deals with this idea of how men, or at least the protagonist in the play, identifies wholesale with his work and the idea of being masculine. While in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, we will be looking at Arthur Miller's critique of, or rather, Arthur Miller's comment on the supposedly failed idea of the American dream, the idea of consumerism, which was sold in America to every family as something which would ultimately lead everyone to success, was something that Arthur Miller challenged, critiqued, and questioned, making the audience question themselves and making the audience revel in their discomfort.